Talking to Cornelius. Conversation 18. Dear Sir, I wish you to publish these few lines in your valuable paper that the public may know that there is gold found in these ranges, about 4 miles from Dr. Barker's home station and about a mile from the Melbourne Road, at the southernmost point of Mount Alexander, where 3 men and myself are working. I do this to prevent parties getting us into trouble, as we have been threatened to have the constables fetched for being on the ground. If you will have the kindness to insert this in your paper, that we are prepared to pay anything that is just when the Commissioner comes. In the name of the party, John Worley, Mount Alexander Rangers. Melbourne Argus, 8th of September, 1851. This was where your adventure began, old man. The adventure of a free man with a vigorous sense of destiny. I imagine you told stories about the excitement that was first stirred up with the Californian news in 1849, and how it primed people's imaginations with the idea that destiny could be changed with the single swing of a pick. Imagine a fortune made not through a class-bound inheritance or a well-connected strategy, but through the physical rhythmic work that a poor man like you knew all too well. I can see you in your grey years conjuring the vivid portion of your younger years that it was all right to talk about. You would tell the stories, even though your children had heard them all 100 times before. The mad exuberance of Melbourne in the early 1850s, the bustling spectacle of Canvastown spread wide on the south side of the Yarra, the long march north to the goldfields with a pick, pan and swag, the hope-fueled business of swirling the sediment of Forest Creek near Mount Alexander and digging. I imagine your boy Jack sitting and listening avidly beside the homestead fire and wondering if he might someday know the high drama and excitement of prospecting. I imagine your gold rush tales were our family's first full-born Australian stories. You were still telling them to reporters at your 50th wedding anniversary in 1902. Mr. Donnelly left Ireland in 1844 and came to Australia. He was at the Forest Creek diggings in 1851 as a digger, and subsequently a carter bringing supplies to the diggings. Launceston Examiner, 24th of October, 1902. The news about gold at Mount Alexander arrived 2 weeks before your Supreme Court case against Tomlins. It isn't entirely clear whether you were in the Hobart Court on that day. I imagine you started planning to get across Bass Strait as soon as the news of gold came through. As an 1851 digger at Forest Creek, you were in the first wave of the Victorian gold rush. The number of diggers rose from 40 to 40,000 in the space of 4 months. I wish I could hear your stories, old man. I wouldn't tire of hearing them. But I have to listen to others' versions and imagine how it must have been for you. Francis Ludwig von Bibra, Jr., was 4 years old when he arrived in Diemens Land in 1822. He was a man of about your age, though his class perspective was no doubt very different. The family took land near the Macquarie River, and his father drowned in the first year after their arrival. The mother and her 8 children stayed at the isolated property. They were visited on one occasion by the Aboriginal resistance fighter Mosquito Jack. The bushranger Matthew Brady came to their homestead on another occasion. Francis provided his reminiscences to a Tasmanian paper when he was 95 years old. He included this account of his own voyage to Gold Rush Melbourne. I left the convict department in the early days of 1852 to go to the Victorian goldfields with a Mr. Thorne, a turner, Mr. William Cooper, a carpenter, and Mr. J. Sullivan, a farmer, in a small bark of 100 tons. She was overcrowded, having close on 200 passengers, besides 26 horses, drays, carts, hay, chaff, etc., and the deck was a scene of great confusion. 9 crafts were bound for Melbourne at the time we started. We were 9 days getting to Georgetown, and the scenes which occurred on board baffle description. Some of the passengers were runaway apprentices, others were thieves and vagabonds, the lowest of the low, pugilists, prostitutes, and the like. A few pious people amongst us also. Singing, dancing, crying, fighting, praying, all could be heard. The captain could not keep order. When dinner was announced, a rush would be made for the galley, and the dinner seized upon by a lot of ruffians who devoured what they wanted and threw lots overboard. If the cook resisted, he was in danger of having his eye blackened or his nose broken. Our party was well supplied with edibles from our private store. At last we arrived at Georgetown, got windbound, lay there about 6 days and had to buy fresh provender for our horses. The wind veered a little, and all the other crafts got away. To our disgust, we could not weather the point, and the poor captain had a bad time of it. Bolton Dick, the old lamplighter, a famous boxer, threatened to throw him overboard. At last, a favourable wind sprang up, and off we started. Got over in about 24 hours, and to our surprise, the crafts that had 3 days' start of us were just putting in an appearance, having been caught in a storm whilst we were lying at Georgetown. All their bullocks, horses, drays, etc., were washed overboard. We rested at Flemington for a few days and made a start for the fields with an old carter who knew all the camping places. He had as passengers his wife and son, 12 years of age, and a rough man and his wife. Before we got far, the carter got drunk, fell off the dray, and was nearly run over. We reached the diggings in safety, however. While staying in Melbourne, I saw some queer sights. Some old hands had just returned from the diggings with their womenfolk, having some hundreds of pounds worth of gold. Would go for a spree up Collins Street. The women decked out in gay dresses of silk of a flaming blue or green colour, with hat, feathers, flowers, and jewellery of the showy type. The men also got up in a ridiculous manner. The cab would be hired, a fiddler engaged, and off they'd ride at a furious pace, the women with pipes in their mouths, the men hurraying, and the fiddlers rasping away at "Susanna, don't you cry for me," or some other pothouse strain. Such sights were frequent. The Tasmanian, Launceston, 6th of April, 1895. Of course, you had an earlier start to the goldfields than Von Bibra. As you made your way up Flemington Road and out of Melbourne in 1851, you would have soon seen evidence of the Black Thursday bushfires that had spread across Victoria in February of that year. The fires rode on the back of a drought and engulfed places as far afield as Gippsland, the Dandenongs, Portland, and Mount Macedon. The apocalyptic fury of that fire was captured in a dramatic panoramic painting by William Strutt in 1864. The dry lingered through 1851, and you would have experienced its challenge in your first summer at the diggings. Forest Creek Diggings, Mount Alexander. Sir, in my former communication I informed you that a few days would be sufficient to dry up the creek, and such is the case this day. For a quarter of a mile above and below my tent the creek is dry, and the diggers are now compelled to cart the earth to water some half a mile off, and those who are not provided with a cart are carrying it in tin dishes on their heads, or shouldering it in bags to mash out the wished-for treasure. Still, with all these inconveniences, many are doing well. Last evening, a party of 5 sold to Messrs. Fenton and Edmonston, in my presence, 47 ounces, 17 pennyweights, and 18 grains, the return for 8 days' work. Another party of 4 dug and washed 29 ounces and 4 pennyweights on Saturday, and this same party has averaged for the week 13 ounces per day. On Friday, a party I am acquainted with obtained 2 pounds 4 ounces by 12 o'clock, but all are very averse to having their names brought forward. There are many making 3, 4 and 5 ounces per day, but there are far more doing literally nothing, and hundreds are leaving the ground for other diggings on Barker's Creek and other places. Yesterday, some 600 or 700 persons arrived from Melbourne, and I'm given to understand that a general break-up took place at Ballarat on Thursday last, all wending their way to these diggings. Some regret having left them, for they stated they could have done much better there had they remained. One thing is certain: hundreds will return in worse circumstances than when they started. Hundreds will make wages, and a few independents. It is remarkable to see the success some meet with, while others, who slave and toil from day to day sinking holes and prying into crevices, get not sufficient gold to pay their daily expenses. Bell's Life in Sydney and Sporting Review, 22nd of November, 1851.